Good morning. It's early morning. I have the sniffles and I'm having a hard time getting going, but I was just so genuinely overcome with gratitude that I thought I would share it. I know that people are talking about trauma a lot these days. Thank goodness. I'm so grateful that this information is just making such a splash. I'm not sure if it's still there now, but I recall in the pandemic that The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk's book on trauma, which was published many years ago, was in the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list for like 150 plus weeks, right? So I'm so grateful that that we know so much about trauma now, but the truth is I never knew it. I never knew about trauma and what it did to my nervous system and how it was living on in my body as though what happened to me then was still happening to me now. And yet I had a head full of this other information that was like, of course I want to set healthy boundaries. Of course I want a healthy relationship. Of course I want to love myself. And no matter what I did, I couldn't do it. This idea that if you know better, it would help, it would fix it, it never fixed it. And so then I felt even more broken, even more shame, because I felt like, well, isn't it obvious that of course I want to be with an available and loving partner, but I couldn't control who I was attracted to, who was attracted to me. I just felt so powerless, no matter how much work I did on myself. It didn't penetrate this thing deep down. And so now that I can see myself through the lens of trauma, which is basically through the lens of survival, through our very sort of primitive, hardwired, the body is going to just go into survival mode, protecting us, igniting our trauma responses, our instincts, no matter what we think we know and understand. I was stuck in survival mode. I was stuck in self-protection mode. And for me, largely, which is so common for people who experience childhood trauma, mine was through living in an actively alcoholic family system after my parents divorced. Each side had active alcoholism, drug addiction, and my stepdad was a classic narcissist. So it was gaslighting and lying and grooming and all of these things. So I did what a lot of people do in this situation, and my instincts kicked in as a fawner. Okay, I'm going to try to de-escalate any conflict by doing whatever I need to do to kind of keep the peace. And I learned how to survive, and maybe even in moments to thrive in those really chaotic environments. And I learned to de-escalate any kind of conflict by abandoning myself. Who was I attracted to? Actively addicted, unavailable, narcissistic, lying, abusive, exploitive partners. Because what my body learned was I know how to navigate this. This is actually where I feel safe, because it's the thing that made me feel safe then. The reason that from 5th grade all the way up until my first marriage, right? So many decades that I had never broken up with a boyfriend. I just stayed. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. In large part, it was one dysfunctional, similar relationship after another all the way through my first marriage. I never broke up with anyone. I would feel this like rage. I would feel this frustration. I would try to point it out to them, like, why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? But I couldn't leave. Because as a fawner, I learned that I de-escalate situations by abandoning myself. I had no skills for healthy boundaries, and healthy boundaries actually went against the grain of where I found safety. My first instinct was the fight response. You know what the fight response did to me as a kid living in that environment? It made things worse. It made things so much worse. It made me the scapegoat. It made my brothers move out. It made the silent treatment increase. it made things worse. I went for real help outside of the family, and they were like, our hands are kind of tied, I don't see any bruises. Not bad enough to really help you out. When the fight response didn't work, the body's going to find a way, and it found a way in fawning. And so it stayed with me all these years, except I didn't know I was living in a trauma response. So again, this tension, this conflict between what my body was doing and what it needed, and this head full of information that was like, what is wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? Why can't I live what I thought was like a healthy, normal life? I couldn't until I started to heal the trauma, until I understood it as trauma at all, which for a lot of us who didn't have bruises is like, trauma? I had trauma? Come on, that's not real trauma. It's real trauma, folks. It's real trauma, and it's not even based on the specifics of your story necessarily. It's about these symptoms that we live with, these chronic dysfunctional relationships, toxic shame, anxiety, hypervigilance, emotional flashbacks. That's the evidence. The stuff that I lived with for decades, and I didn't have this language. So I'm just sitting here going, I'm so glad I finally make sense to myself. That's all I really wanted to say, and I said a whole lot more. I really hope that you are starting to make sense to yourself, that you are starting to find flexibility with these instincts that were like, don't worry, we've got it, And thank goodness, we have that. I love the wisdom of our body. I know that my body was doing exactly what it was meant to do, which was to protect me in the circumstances that it was living in. Thank goodness I'm not living in those circumstances anymore. I have found my way into a loving marriage. I'm a mom. I have a beautiful career and friendships, and my body does not need to feel like lockdown is coming and I'm about to get in trouble and it's going to be worse and there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Because there's nothing fundamentally wrong with any of us. Okay, that's my morning sniffle talk. I'm Dr. Ingrid Clayton. I'm a clinical psychologist, a trauma therapist, and a trauma survivor. Welcome to this channel where I talk about the intersection of that childhood, that addicted family system, narcissistic family system, and complex trauma, which is relational trauma, right? And it shows up differently than shock trauma, what we typically think of as trauma, car accidents, things of that nature. So you matter, your story matters. I'm glad you're here. Hit subscribe and stick around, and I'll be doing more sniffle morning talks. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.